The Screaming Room. It was a cold December evening in the small town of Elmwood, Ohio. The air carried an unusual chill even for this time of year. Families were gathered around their fireplaces, unaware of the events unfolding just outside the city limits. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? James Carter, a 35-year-old mechanic, lived alone in a century-old farmhouse on the outskirts of town. His wife had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving him to care for their property by himself. The house, though charming, had always given James an uneasy feeling, especially one particular room on the second floor. That night, as James finished repairing his truck in the garage, he noticed something strange. A faint sound, almost like whispering, seemed to be coming from upstairs. He glanced at the clock. 9:17 p.m. Too late for visitors, and definitely too late for his imagination to play tricks on him. Climbing the creaky wooden stairs, James felt the temperature drop noticeably. By the time he reached the second floor, his breath had become visible in the frigid air. The sound grew louder, more distinct now. It wasn't whispering anymore, it was screaming. The source came from the west wing of the house, a part of the building rarely used. Specifically, the Red Room, so named because its walls were painted a deep crimson that seemed to glow faintly in low light. James hesitated outside the closed door. The screams continued, echoing through the hallway. Taking a deep breath, James turned the brass doorknob. The door opened with a slow creak, revealing a scene that would haunt him forever. The room was empty, yet the screaming filled the space with an intensity that defied logic. James's heart pounded as he stepped inside. The wallpaper, faded but still recognizable as Victorian floral patterns, seemed to shift and move in the dim light. Shadows danced across the walls, though no source of movement could be seen. The temperature dropped further, causing James to shiver uncontrollably. He checked his watch. 9:23 p.m. Time seemed to stretch and warp within the confines of the room. The screams changed pitch, becoming more desperate, more human-like. Yet there was no one there, just the empty space and the overwhelming sense of dread. James remembered hearing stories about the previous owners of the house, a family who had lived there in the early 1900s. Rumors spoke of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths, but these were just tales, weren't they? Urban legends meant to entertain rather than terrify. As he stood frozen in the center of the room, the screams began to form words. At first, they were indistinct, jumbled sounds, but gradually, they became clearer. "Help me! Get out! They're coming!" Each phrase sent a new wave of fear through James's body. His phone, left charging downstairs, buzzed with a text message from his friend Mark. "Hey, you still up?" the message read. James considered responding, but the phone remained safely downstairs while he was trapped in this nightmare. The buzzing stopped as quickly as it started. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second stretching into eternity. 9:28 p.m. The room's atmosphere shifted again, becoming heavier, more oppressive. James's breathing quickened as he realized the screaming had stopped. Complete silence filled the space, more terrifying than the noise had been. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Not the overhead bulb, which had long since burned out, but the very air itself seemed to shimmer and pulse with an otherworldly energy. Shadows detached themselves from the walls, taking on forms that defied description, shapes that twisted and writhed in ways that shouldn't be possible. James backed toward the door, his movements slow and deliberate, every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to cooperate. The temperature continued to plummet, frost forming on the window panes despite the lack of cold air entering the room. At 9:34 p.m., the door slammed shut behind him. The sound reverberated through the house, shaking the very foundations. James spun around, panic rising in his chest. The handle wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pulled or pushed. The room had sealed itself off from the rest of the world. The shapes in the corners of the room began to move closer. Their forms solidified into something resembling human figures. But not quite. Eyes glowed with an unnatural light, mouths stretched impossibly wide. Whispers filled the air once more, surrounding James on all sides. "Who are you?" James demanded, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound authoritative. The whispers responded, though no actual words could be discerned. Instead, they formed a cacophony of sound that threatened to overwhelm his senses. Time lost all meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps it was only seconds. James couldn't tell anymore. His watch had stopped functioning, the hands frozen at 9:36 p.m. The room seemed to expand and contract, changing size and shape with each passing moment. Then, without warning, everything went silent. The shadows retreated to the corners, the temperature returned to normal, and the door opened easily when James turned the handle. Stepping out into the hallway, he found nothing unusual waiting for him. The rest of the house remained calm and quiet. But the experience had changed James. He couldn't sleep in that house anymore. Within a week, he had sold the property and moved to another state. To this day, the current owners refuse to enter the red room. They've boarded it up, sealing it off from the rest of the house. Sometimes, late at night, people walking past the old farmhouse claim to hear screams coming from within, though no one dares to investigate. The legend of the screaming room lives on, whispered among the residents of Elmwood. A reminder that some places are best left undisturbed. The story ends where it began, with a cold December evening in Ohio. But now, whenever someone hears an unexpected sound in the night, they think twice before investigating. Because sometimes, the truth is far more terrifying than any urban legend. Pause here for reflection. Let the weight of the tale settle in the listener's mind. The final word lingers in the air, fading slowly into silence. He wasn't on the guest list. It was a chilly October evening in rural Vermont, where the small town of Willow Creek prepared for its annual autumn festival. The leaves had turned into fiery shades of red and orange, carpeting the ground beneath towering maple trees. The air carried the faint scent of wood smoke mingled with pumpkin spice, creating an atmosphere both cozy and mysterious. Rachel Thompson, a local schoolteacher in her early 30s, had volunteered to help organize this year's event. She stood near the entrance of the community center, clutching a clipboard filled with names and details. The golden hour light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot as families began arriving for the festivities. "Good evening, Mrs. Peterson." Rachel greeted a familiar face, checking off another name from her meticulously organized list. "Your grandchildren must be excited about the haunted house tour tonight." As the line of visitors grew longer, Rachel noticed a tall figure standing silently at the edge of the parking lot. He wore a dark overcoat that seemed out of place in the crisp but not freezing weather. His presence felt different, though she couldn't quite articulate why. Perhaps it was the way he remained motionless while everyone else bustled about, or how his gaze seemed fixed directly on her despite the distance. "Excuse me," came a voice behind her, startling Rachel from her thoughts. She turned to assist another family, but when she glanced back toward the parking lot moments later, the man was gone. Shaking off an inexplicable feeling of unease, she returned to her duties. The festival proceeded smoothly throughout the evening. Children laughed as they navigated the hay maze, couples strolled hand in hand through the pumpkin patch, and elderly residents shared stories around the bonfire. Yet Rachel couldn't shake the image of that strange man from her mind. Several times, she caught herself scanning the crowd, searching for his distinctive silhouette. Around 9 o'clock, as the last scheduled events drew to a close, Rachel began directing volunteers in the cleanup process. The temperature had dropped noticeably, and a thin mist crept across the grounds, swirling around lampposts and benches. Most attendees had already departed, leaving only a few stragglers enjoying the final moments of the celebration. "Rachel," called Mark Harrison, one of the event coordinators, "have you seen anyone still wandering around?" I thought I heard footsteps near the old storage shed. A chill ran down Rachel's spine that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. No, everyone should be accounted for by now. She hesitated, then added, but earlier, there was this man. I never saw him approach the registration table. Mark frowned, adjusting his flashlight beam. That's odd. Let's do a quick sweep of the area before we lock up. Better safe than sorry. They split up to cover more ground, agreeing to meet back at the main entrance in 15 minutes. As Rachel made her way past the deserted food stalls and silent game booths, she couldn't help but notice how different everything looked under the dim security lights. Shadows danced eerily along the building's walls, and every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. Suddenly, she froze. There, near the edge of the woods, stood the man in the dark overcoat again. This time, he wasn't merely observing, he was watching her intently, his expression unreadable in the poor lighting. Her heart pounded against her ribcage as she tried to recall if she'd ever seen him before in town, but something about him felt wrong. "Hello?" she called out tentatively, taking a cautious step forward. "Can I help you with something?" Instead of responding, the man tilted his head slightly, almost like a curious animal studying its surroundings. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the tree line. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She knew she should alert Mark immediately, but curiosity propelled her forward instead. Maybe she could catch up to him and ask what he wanted. The forest path leading away from the festival grounds felt impossibly darker than it should have been. Moonlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy above, and Rachel found herself relying heavily on her phone's flashlight app. Twigs snapped underfoot, and the occasional owl hooted in the distance, heightening her sense of isolation. After walking for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably much less, she emerged into a small clearing. And there, standing perfectly still amidst the encroaching darkness, was the man once more. Up close, she realized his features were remarkably ordinary. Brown hair, average build, plain face, yet somehow profoundly unsettling. His eyes reflected her phone's light in an unnatural way, almost glowing. "You shouldn't be here," Rachel managed to say, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound authoritative. "This is private property." For the first time he spoke, his voice low and measured. "I'm looking for someone. They told me I'd find answers here." "What kind of answers?" she pressed, inching backward slowly. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. "Who are you looking for?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a photograph. Even from several feet away, Rachel recognized the faded image instantly. It showed a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to herself. Same hair color, similar facial structure. Only the style of clothing suggested it was taken decades ago. "My sister," he said finally, his tone heavy with sorrow. "She went missing after attending one of these festivals." "That was," he paused, calculating, 2 years ago tonight." Rachel's blood ran cold. She remembered hearing vague rumors about a disappearance connected to the autumn festival, but no one ever talked about it openly. Local legends hinted at supernatural occurrences tied to the land itself, stories passed down through generations but rarely believed. Could this man truly be searching for closure after all these years? Before she could respond, a sudden gust of wind extinguished her phone's screen, plunging them both into near-total darkness. Panic surged through her veins as she fumbled to reactivate the device. When the light finally flickered back on, the man was gone. Not just stepped aside or hidden, completely vanished, as if he'd never existed. Shaken to her core, Rachel stumbled back toward the festival grounds, calling Mark's name repeatedly. Together, they searched the entire area again, finding no trace of the mysterious visitor. Later, while reviewing security footage from multiple angles, they discovered something even more disturbing. Not a single camera had captured any sign of the man in the dark overcoat. It was as though he'd slipped between the cracks of reality itself. In the weeks that followed, Rachel found herself unable to forget those haunting eyes or the photograph that seemed to bridge past and present. She began researching local history archives, determined to uncover the truth about the missing woman. What she learned chilled her to the bone. Numerous unexplained disappearances linked to the festival site over the past century. Each case involved a solitary individual vanishing without a trace during the annual celebration. None were ever solved. Despite warnings from friends and colleagues to let sleeping dogs lie, Rachel continued her investigation. Something about the man's desperate search resonated deeply within her. Perhaps it was survivor's guilt, or maybe a subconscious recognition of shared pain. Whatever the reason, she felt compelled to seek answers, no matter where the trail might lead. One moonless night, armed with flashlights and determination, Rachel and Mark ventured back to the clearing where she'd last seen the stranger. The air felt heavier than usual, charged with an almost electric tension. Leaves whispered secrets as they crunched underfoot, and shadows danced unpredictably despite the steady beams of their lights. "Do you really think we'll find anything?" Mark asked skeptically, though his grip on the flashlight betrayed underlying nerves. "This whole situation feels off." "I don't know," Rachel admitted softly, scanning the perimeter for any signs of disturbance. "But I can't shake the feeling that we're missing something important, something right under our noses." They spent nearly an hour combing the area, finding nothing but ancient tree roots and scattered stones. Just as frustration began to set in, Mark spotted something glinting faintly among the foliage. Kneeling down, he unearthed a tarnished silver locket half buried in the dirt. Inside lay two tiny photographs, one of the woman from the original picture, smiling brightly, and another of a younger version of the man in the dark overcoat, his arms slung casually around her shoulders. "Oh my God," Rachel breathed, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "This has to belong to her, to his sister." Without warning, the temperature plummeted dramatically, causing both of them to shiver violently. Their flashlights flickered erratically, threatening to die altogether. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, seeming to emanate from the very earth beneath their feet. And then, emerging from the shadows like a specter materializing from smoke, stood the man once more. His expression hadn't changed, but his presence felt different somehow, more solid yet simultaneously ethereal. He extended a hand toward Rachel, palm upturned expectantly. In that moment, she understood what he wanted, needed from her. Placing the locket gently into his grasp, she whispered, "I'm so sorry. We'll keep looking. I promise." For the first time since their encounter, emotion flickered across his face, gratitude mixed with profound sadness. Slowly, deliberately, he closed his fingers around the precious keepsake. As he did so, his form began to dissolve, fading away like morning mist beneath the rising sun. Within seconds, he was gone, leaving behind only silence and the lingering scent of autumn leaves. Back in Willow Creek, Rachel dedicated herself to preserving the memory of those lost souls whose stories had been forgotten by time. She worked tirelessly to ensure proper memorials were established and historical records updated accurately. Though she never encountered the man in the dark overcoat again, she often sensed his presence during quiet moments, a gentle reminder that some mysteries transcend human understanding, existing beyond the veil of our everyday lives. Every October, as the festival preparations begin anew, Rachel finds herself drawn to that secluded clearing deep within the woods. There, surrounded by whispering trees and dancing shadows, she leaves fresh flowers and a handwritten note promising continued vigilance. Because sometimes, justice isn't about solving a case or finding definitive answers. Sometimes, it's about honoring the memories of those who came before us, ensuring their voices aren't silenced